History tells us the White House was built with pride and unity. That it rose from the ground as a symbol of freedom and democracy. But the truth beneath its marble face is darker than anyone ever taught in school. Beneath those shining floors are hundreds of bodies. Bodies that were never granted names in the records. Bodies that were worked until they died. Bodies buried so deep that the government believed the earth itself would swallow the truth forever. They were wrong, because the dead do not stay silent. And the White House was never meant to be a tomb. Tonight, we begin the story they wanted erased. A story of screams mixed with mortar. A story of ghosts trapped inside America's most famous home. This is not just history. This is horror built into the foundation. Now, let us go back to the beginning. The construction they tried to forget. Between 1792 and the year 1800, more than 400 enslaved people were forced to build what would become the most recognizable building in the United States. Men, women, children, their blood soaked into the mud under every block of stone they lifted. Not one of their names appears on the official completion records. Their graves were left unmarked. Their stories stolen, their suffering erased by design. For 200 years, the government insisted this silence was just an accident of history. But in 1901, workers renovating the East Wing found something that changed everything. When the first shovel struck the hidden space beneath the foundation, the superintendent immediately ordered the workers to stop. They were sworn to silence. The discovery was covered back up before the sun set. Whatever they saw down there was something America could never allow the world to know. It would not be the last discovery. It was simply the first one they failed to destroy. But to understand what those hidden horrors meant, we must return to the swamps along the Potomac River. A capital built on debt and desperation. In 1790, Philadelphia served as the nation's temporary capital. Congress passed the Residence Act that same year, choosing a new permanent home along the Potomac River. President George Washington personally selected the exact location in January 1791. 10 miles square of mosquito-filled land. Hot, rotten, malarial, a place that chewed up men and spit them out. But the government had one problem. They were broke, completely broke. The construction of the new capital would take more money than the young nation had ever spent. The president's house, the Capitol, government buildings, roads, all of it was projected to cost $400,000. A mountain of money for a country drowning in war debt. Thomas Jefferson, then Secretary of State, proposed what he called a clever cost-saving measure. Instead of hiring paid workers, they would rent enslaved labor from local masters. $5 a month for each enslaved person. Their owners would get the money. The workers themselves would get only food, thin clothing, and the beating sun. Jefferson wrote that it would ensure work continued with no delay and no complaints. Complaints. As if a scream is simply a complaint. Names that were never meant to be remembered. Irish architect James Hoban designed the original plans for the president's house. Washington reviewed them and demanded the building be made even larger. Bigger than Hoban imagined. Bigger than anyone could build without more people. Enslaved people from Virginia and Maryland were dragged from plantations across counties like Prince George's County, Charles County, Montgomery County, and Loudoun County. Their masters got secure income. The workers got a promise. They would be returned home unharmed. That promise was a lie. Ledgers show only small clues of who they were. Sometimes not even a name. Tom, age 23. Peter, age 19. Harry, a boy maybe 14. Len, over 50 years old but forced to break his body anyway. These were not laborers. These were people, with families, with histories, taken and forgotten by the very nation they were building. Mud, frost, death, repeat. The first winter was brutal. They were given shovels and pickaxes and forced to dig in waist-deep mud while the wind cut through their bones. The commissioners wrote casually about difficulties with Negro labor due to weather. So cold, so cruel, so easy to erase someone from a sentence. One note from December 1792 mentions the replacement of 3 workers who could not continue. It never explains what happened to them. We know exactly what happened. They died, and their bodies disappeared into the swamp. That was the system. Use them, break them, replace them. The skilled, the necessary, the vanished. Some enslaved workers had skills the government desperately needed. A man named Isaac, a carpenter hired from a plantation owner called Samuel Hanson. Isaac worked with precision. He built the bones of the president's house. He helped craft the spaces where future presidents would eat, sleep, and make decisions for the nation. Isaac appears in payment logs until November 1794. Then his name disappears. No travel, no medical record, no sale, no return to his home plantation. Just silence, like he never existed. Another enslaved man, Peter Lennox, supervised stone cutting at the dangerous government quarry in Aquia, Virginia. Sandstone for the White House came from there. Huge blocks that could kill a man in a blink if they slipped. Lennox's work was praised. He was called reliable, skilled, essential. By 1796, he too vanished from all documentation. And still, the White House grew taller. A house built on bones. Every stone set into the walls. Every beam raised into the sky. Every drop of sweat that soaked the earth. It came from people who would never walk away from the job they were forced to do. The official history says the White House is a symbol of freedom. But that freedom was purchased with the lives of people who were never free at all. Somewhere beneath those walls, the truth is still buried. And sometimes, at night, when the lights go out in the West Wing, they say footsteps can be heard in the basement. Footsteps belonging to people who want their stories told at last. To be continued. Part 2 will reveal the first recorded death on the White House site and the terrifying reason the workers refused to dig a certain corner of the foundation. Before you go, comment below where you are watching from. Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia, anywhere in America. These stories belong to all of us. And subscribe to Liturgy of Fear so you never miss the next chapter they tried to bury. The dead are waiting. Would you like me to continue with Part 2 in the same style and length? Liturgy of Fear, Part 2. The Marks in the Stone. Imagine walking into the White House today. Secret Service at every corner. Tourists staring at chandeliers. Portraits of presidents hanging on the walls like silent judges. Now imagine this. Behind those walls are stones that once had names carved into them by trembling hands. Names of people whose bones might be buried right beneath the floor you stand on. Names the government tried to hide by turning those stones inward so no one would ever see the truth. But the dead always find a way to be heard. Some say on quiet nights you can hear tapping from inside the walls. Not the sound of pipes. Not the wind, tapping, as if someone is still trying to carve their name before time runs out. Tonight, we keep listening. The quarry of blood and stone. The sandstone for the president's house came from Aquia, Virginia. Cream-colored blocks carved straight out of the earth. The work was deadly. One wrong cut and a stone weighing thousands of pounds could crush a man into the ground with no chance of survival. An enslaved man named Lennox supervised the stone cutting. Skilled, strong, trusted. His name appeared in records until 1796. Then it vanished. No return, no payment, no explanation, just gone. He became another ghost erased on purpose. The commissioners who oversaw this project constantly feared delays. President Washington wanted the house completed before he left office in 1797. That pressure led to 16-hour days every time the sun came up. Forced labor from dawn until dark with nothing but exhaustion waiting when the day ended. The enslaved workers had no rest, no hope, and no escape. Hell for a bed. The enslaved men were kept in crude wooden buildings thrown up near the site. Cold wind blew through the walls. Rain leaked from the roof. An expense note from 1793 shows they were given straw for their beds. Straw on the ground, nothing more. Their food was the absolute cheapest scraps available. The records mention salt fish and cornmeal. No meat, no vegetables, just enough to keep them alive for the next day's suffering. Disease spread like fire. Malaria, dysentery, typhoid. One letter complained that the flux had taken hold among the Negro laborers. That sickness killed 1/3 of the workforce in days. The tone of the letter was cold. Not a single word about pain or death. Just concern that the project would slow down. Human lives reduced to construction delays. Broken bodies left behind. A doctor named William Thornton was paid very little to treat enslaved laborers. He visited them rarely. Records show he spent more time treating white workers even though the enslaved outnumbered them. When an enslaved person grew too sick to work, they were sent away like a broken tool. The commissioners would simply rent another person. No record of if they survived or died. A Scottish stonemason named Colin Williamson kept a private diary. His writings give us something the commissioners never did. The truth. He wrote that the Negro men worked the stone until their hands bled. They had no gloves. Infections spread. No one cared. Williamson recorded something the official documents never mentioned. A scaffold collapsed in July 1794. 3 men fell. 2 were enslaved. 1 was white. The white worker was rushed to the doctor. The 2 enslaved men were left lying on the ground for an hour. 1 had a broken back. He likely died days later. There is no record of his name. Just a new entry in the ledger. Negro Man Jim. A replacement for the body now missing. This happened again and again. People erased and replaced like notes on a chalkboard. The workforce of shadows. By 1798 almost 500 people worked on the site. Most were enslaved, but the documents suddenly grew vague. No more references to Negro laborers or Negro carpenters. Instead the commissioners wrote workers or servants. They were hiding the truth even as the walls rose higher. Washington himself visited the construction site multiple times. He wrote in his diary about progress and costs. He never wrote a single word about the enslaved people who did the work. Silence was easier for him. White workers were paid. They had names in books. They were allowed to leave. When they died, their families were notified. Their graves had markers. Enslaved workers were denied everything, even their own names. Yet they did not let themselves be forgotten. The secret they carved into the walls. In 1796 James Hoban noticed strange scratches on stones being set into the north wall. At first he thought it was damage from lifting or transport. But when he looked closer, he saw symbols. Letters. Messages. Carved quickly but carved with purpose. He asked if the stones should be replaced. The commissioners told him to turn the stones inward. Hide the marks. Cover the truth. Those marks were not meaningless. They were names. The only proof those people existed. The only proof they ever lived. Names carved with hands that knew they may not live until morning. Names carved so they would never be erased even if their bodies disappeared into the riverbank. They were trying to speak to the future. They were speaking to us. A warning set in stone. Imagine those symbols sealed inside the walls. Imagine those spirits trapped with no sunlight. No freedom. Just darkness and silence. For more than 200 years. Some workers who later maintained the White House claimed they heard tapping from the inside of the walls. Like someone trying to get out. Like someone still carving. Official reports deny supernatural activity. They have to deny it. Because if the voices are real, then the guilt is real too. And the White House does not want to face the dead. To be continued. Part 3 will reveal something buried under the original foundation. Something that made a construction crew in 1901 run from the basement and swear never to speak of what they saw. Before we continue this journey together, comment where you are watching from. Washington, Virginia, Maryland, anywhere in America. This history belongs to you too. Subscribe to Liturgy of Fear to keep uncovering the stories they buried deep in the ground. The dead carved their names into the walls. Now we must speak them. Would you like me to continue with Part 3 next? Liturgy of Fear, Part 3. The Forgotten Ones. Picture the east wing of the White House. Cameras flashing, reporters rushing, political power on full display. Now imagine that beneath the polished floors and bright lights lie skulls. Dozens of them, buried in the dirt with no names. No graves, no prayers. The ground under the most powerful house in America is a cemetery. But this is no peaceful resting place. These dead were hidden on purpose. Covered by concrete and silence. And silence is where ghosts grow strongest. Tonight, we uncover what the government tried to bury twice. The girl with no record. In his diary, Colin Williamson once mentioned a young girl tending the sick. She appeared in no official records. Her name was never written down. She cooked for sick workers. She washed their clothes. She may have tried to save their lives. Then she disappeared. Women worked there too, but the commissioners hardly mentioned them. They were treated like shadows. Brought into the camp when needed. Sent back or discarded when not. On August 5, 1797, Williamson wrote a short entry that still chills historians. The shed near the kiln is empty now. All of them. I asked what happened to the men who were there. No one will speak. He saw no wagons carry sick men away. No doctor rushing in or out. Just silence. And an empty shed. Something dark had happened. Something they wanted erased. Where did they go? One plantation owner noticed his enslaved workers never returned. Isaac the carpenter was one of them. His master wrote to the commissioners begging for answers. Payment for their rental continued for a while. But the workers never came home for harvest. The master needed them to survive. Enslaved men were not just labor to him. They were profit. The commissioners responded with a cold and vague message. The men had summer illness. They were being cared for. They would find out more soon. There is no letter showing they ever followed up. The silence meant only one thing. These men were gone. Most likely, dead. But if the owners stopped asking questions, the government stopped answering. That silence was intentional. The 5 who forced a confession. Some plantation owners refused to be ignored. In November of 1797, William Brent wrote an angry letter. He wanted 5 enslaved workers returned immediately. They had been replaced long ago. But the original 5 were still missing. He demanded the truth, and money if they were dead. This time the commissioners answered fast. Their tone changed. Defensive. Nervous. The workers died. It was unfortunate. They knew the risks. No further payment will be made. There were no names. No burial sites. No explanation of how their lives ended. Just a business matter closed. If 5 deaths forced that confession, how many others were buried in silence because no owner pushed hard enough? Even future architects tried to guess the real number. One historian in the late 1800s estimated that 30 to 50 enslaved workers died building the White House. Yet many believe that number is much higher. Workers were dropping like stones into a pit. Replaceable. Forgettable. But the ground remembers. The discovery that shook the foundation. The year was 1901. A renovation crew was reinforcing the east wing. Digging deep. Breaking into the untouched soil beneath the oldest structure of the house. Then the shovels hit something hard. A skull. Then another. And another. At least 12 skulls were uncovered. Bones scattered. Mixed together. No coffins. No markers. Just bodies dumped in the earth. One skull had a fracture. Another showed cracks like someone was crushed or struck. Some bones looked broken in ways that hinted at violence, not just accidents. This was no proper burial. It was disposal. The superintendent overseeing the project was Henry Reed. He froze the moment he saw those bones. He understood the danger. If America learned that enslaved people were buried beneath the White House, it would destroy the image of heroic founding fathers and their shining democracy. He made a choice. A terrible one. He ordered the workers to rebury every bone right where they found them. Fill the hole. Never speak about it again. The crew became silent, especially the black workers. They knew exactly who those people were. One elderly worker whispered a name for them. The Forgotten Ones. A secret buried twice. Henry Reed kept a diary. Inside it, he confessed everything. We found bones beneath the foundation line. We counted at least 12 skulls. I moved the work and warned the men. Speak of this and you are fired. Then he sealed the truth under dirt again. He never filed a report. Never told the president. Never told the country. He took the secret to his grave in 1924. Almost 80 years later, historians discovered his diary. And suddenly everything the commissioners tried to hide started to rise back to the surface like drowning hands breaking through water. Who were those 12 people? Were they the ones from the kiln shed? Were they the names erased from the payment books? Were they the 5 that Brent demanded answers for? How many more like them lie under the lawns where presidents shake hands and smile for the cameras? Restless beneath the East Wing. We know this much. At least a dozen enslaved workers died and were thrown into the ground without respect. They died in service to a country that never meant to honor them. They died building a house they would never be welcome in. Some say their spirits are still there. That when the East Wing is quiet and the lights go out, security guards hear slow footsteps in the dirt beneath the floor. Some hear soft moans. Some hear scratching, like fingernails trying to get out. The forgotten ones were buried twice. But souls do not stay buried when injustice holds them down. They rise. They remember. And they want the world to remember too. To be continued. Part 4 will reveal what a White House maid saw in the basement in 1948. She ran from the building crying and refused to ever work there again. Subscribe to Liturgy of Fear. Comment where you are watching from. Help give voice to the people who were never allowed to speak. The forgotten ones are waiting. And their story is not finished. Would you like me to continue with Part 4 now? Part 4. Beneath the White House. Hook. What do you do when the ground beneath the most powerful house in America is hiding a secret graveyard no one wants to admit exists? You would think a building like the White House would have a perfect history. Clean stories. Glorious records. Names of every hand that shaped it. But when you dig beneath the surface, both literally and historically, you start to find what people wanted buried forever. Bones. Secrets. Horror. After discovering Henry Reed's diary from 1901, I felt a chill that would not go away. His words were clear. He found human remains beneath the White House. At least 12 skulls. Maybe more. Skulls with signs of violence. Skulls that should not have been there. And he covered it up to protect the government from scandal. But that raised the most terrifying question yet. Why were those people buried like that in the first place? To find answers, I returned to the summer of 1797. There are reports that construction workers fell sick and vanished. Letters from plantation owners asking where their enslaved laborers had gone. Demands for their return. And vague replies hinting at death but never admitting to the full truth. These people had names, families, lives, yet they disappeared as if they were never born. It was not a sickness that killed them. Not a plague. Something else lurked at that construction site. Superintendent William Williamson, the man who kept a private journal, documented a young enslaved girl tending to sick workers in a remote shed. His last note about that shed was short and terrifying. The shed was empty. Everyone gone. No carts. No workers walking away. Just gone. Williamson knew something awful happened. But he had no power to challenge those in charge. So he stayed quiet. Fear has a strong way of silencing the truth. What is more chilling is how frightened he seemed by the young girl. He wrote that her eyes looked strange, almost silver in the candlelight, and that she never spoke. When the men were dying, she did not show fear. Instead, she folded her hands and watched, like she was waiting for something. Some moment when the air would finally shift. When the workers would stop fighting death and fall into it. Then she disappeared too. Now here was the disturbing pattern. People were falling sick. But there is sickness that makes you weak and slow. There is another kind that takes you fast. Too fast. The kind that drains every last bit of life from your bones. And no one could explain it. At least 5 workers from William Brent's plantation died, according to a rare admission in one letter. But that number was only revealed because he demanded answers. If he had stayed silent, the truth would have been buried right along with them. Historians believe that death toll was far higher. 30 to 50, maybe more than 70. Imagine that. Dozens of enslaved people dying in a place that would become the center of American leadership. Dying while building the home of freedom and democracy. And then buried like garbage. I tracked the location of the foundation where Reed found the bones. It lines up with the early construction zone where the shed and kiln once stood. The same place where the sick workers were taken. The same place where they vanished. And then another detail from Reed's diary hit me hard. One of the workers from 1901, an elderly man named Joseph, said his grandfather called them the Forgotten Ones. That means the story was whispered through generations of workers on those grounds. People knew. They just never had the power to speak publicly. The truth hid behind the walls of silence. Reed wrote something else that has kept me awake at night. He mentioned that some skulls had strange marks. Not from disease, not from falling stones, but from something sharp, something that cracked bone as if the skulls were smashed after death. Or maybe in the moment of it. Accidents happen on construction sites. Sure, but at least a dozen accidents in the same small area. And all buried secretly. That is not an accident. That is disposal. That is a cover-up. Why smash skulls? Why bury them hurriedly near the foundation rather than sending bodies home or notifying their families? Because someone did not want anyone to identify the dead. Someone did not want anyone asking questions. As I dug deeper, I found a letter that was never published. A private note from a commissioner to another official. A single sentence that made my blood run cold. They are not dying from work. They are being taken by something in the ground. Taken, not killed. Taken. What does that mean? A bad foundation, poisoned soil, or something spiritual, something far more disturbing. Some workers reported feeling watched. Some fled the site and refused to return. Others said a presence haunted the lower ground where the enslaved workers slept. Williamson wrote one cryptic line 2 days before the sick workers disappeared. There is movement in the earth at night. And that girl knows what it is. Every time I think about that young girl, my heart races. Who was she really? Why was she brought there? And why did she vanish without any trace along with the sick men? Today tourists laugh and explore the White House without knowing what rests below. But there are places under the East Wing where workers refuse to go alone. They say the temperature drops suddenly. They say they hear whispers through stone walls. They say shadows move where there is no light. And sometimes, they claim to hear bones grinding against soil. As if something buried is trying to rise. The government will never admit it. They will keep the silence. They will guard the secret. But if the dead were buried beneath the White House foundation, and if their souls were never given peace, then they never left. They are still there, waiting for someone to notice them. Waiting for someone to give them justice. Waiting to remind the world that America's most celebrated home was built upon a grave. Hundreds walk above them every day. And the dead are listening. Would you like me to continue with part 5? It will go even deeper into the supernatural side of the story and what modern investigators have uncovered beneath the White House. Part 5. The Night They Rose. What if the souls buried under the White House never stopped working? What if they are still building something in the darkness below? Most ghost stories are just shadows and old houses creaking. But what lies below the White House is not a story. It is buried truth. It is restless. After reading every disturbing document from the late 1700s and early 1900s, I realized something chilling. No one ever tried to move those buried workers. Henry Reed reburied the remains he found in 1901 and warned his crew to stay silent. The bones were never studied. Never blessed. Never laid in a real grave. The forgotten ones were left in the dark. And dark places remember. There are interviews from modern staff members of the White House. Gardeners, maintenance workers, security guards. They refuse to speak on record. But quietly, outside the gates, some have whispered what they experienced beneath the famous building. They hear hammering where no construction is happening. Tools hitting rock. The drag of heavy stone being moved. Moans echoing through tunnels that were sealed off generations ago. When they report these sounds, the answers are always the same. Old pipes, wind, imagination. But one security guard described it differently. He was working the night shift in the basement hall near the East Wing. It was quiet. He was alone. Then he heard footsteps behind him. Slow, heavy. He turned. No one was there. He took a step forward and the footsteps followed. When he walked faster, they did too. He stopped. And they stopped. That was the moment he quit. He said it felt like someone was right behind him. But when he turned, the hallway stayed empty. Still, he could feel a breath on his neck. Cold, angry. He said the ground beneath his boots felt alive. Others have heard voices. Not clear voices. Just words that sound like crying. Groans of people still working even in death. Because when enslaved workers died on the construction site, they were replaced immediately. The project could not slow down. The president needed a home. The nation needed a symbol. The dead did not matter. Bodies buried. Work continued. Now the dead continue working too. One chilling discovery from Williamson's journal keeps returning to my thoughts. Before the sick workers vanished, he wrote about their strange dreams. They dreamed of being underground. They dreamed of waking in a different world, beneath the foundation. They dreamed of digging and digging, even after their bodies had failed. And every morning, they grew weaker. Some historians believe the illness was malaria. Others said exhaustion. But that does not explain the girl. That does not explain why their bodies were never returned home. That does not explain why skulls were cracked. Malaria does not break skulls. There are stories whispered in the South about spirits of enslaved workers who cannot find peace. Spirits forced to repeat the labor that killed them. They are called the bound ones. Souls chained to the earth by unfinished suffering. They do not haunt for revenge. They haunt because they cannot stop. Imagine dozens of those tortured spirits trapped below the White House. Imagine their hands still scraping dirt. Their backs still bending under weight. Their cries unheard. Their work unending. A paranormal researcher once snuck into a maintenance tunnel under the East Wing in 1996. He brought an old tape recorder. What he captured on that tape was a sound like rocks being dragged across stone. Then something far worse. Low voices chanting, almost humming, like a work song from the fields. Voices out of rhythm. Voices that broke into painful cries. He ran out screaming. He swore he felt a hand grab his ankle from the dirt floor. He never returned. Some people say he was lying. That he wanted attention. But workers have told similar stories for over a century. Even Henry Reed's own diary mentioned the living getting quiet when they found the bones. Fear passed down in families of groundskeepers. They believed those buried there watched them. Sometimes they even helped guide workers away from unstable ground, like the dead were warning the living to step carefully. Maybe they do not want others to join them under the dirt. Or maybe they do. When the expansions of the White House happened in the 1940s, digging came dangerously close again to the secret grave site. Records mention one worker who left the project mid-shift and refused to come back. His wife later said he woke screaming every night for the rest of his life. He told her that he saw a hand push up through the soil and reach for his leg. But the strangest event of all happened in 1974. During routine electrical work, a team opened a space near the old foundation. The first man who looked inside dropped his flashlight. He claimed he saw 3 figures standing in the dirt. Not skeletons. Not shadows. Full figures. Their eyes glowed faintly, like silver in darkness. The same eyes Williamson once wrote about. The eyes of that mysterious girl. He left that night and never spoke publicly, but his co-workers said he never recovered. He believed he had seen the workers who disappeared in summer 1797. Still waiting to be found. Still waiting for justice. The White House remains a place of power. Leaders come and go. Decisions shape the world. Speeches promise freedom. But the foundation beneath those speeches is a grave for people who never received freedom at all. The forgotten ones are part of the house. They helped build it. They were buried in it. The house stands tall because they lie below. Today tourists stroll the gardens and smile for photos. They do not think of the earth under their feet. They do not know that among the roots and rocks, bones are stacked like abandoned tools. They do not know that the dead are listening, watching, whispering in the night. And every year, small sinkholes appear near the East Wing. Small holes where the earth collapses suddenly. The official reason is soil shifting. But workers on the grounds know better. They say it is the dead working their way up. Trying to be remembered. Trying to rise. The White House glows bright each night. But underneath that bright symbol, there is darkness. A darkness that was never buried deep enough. A darkness that belongs to those who built the American dream with their blood. They never got justice. But they are still waiting. And they are not done. Would you like part 6? In the next chapter, the paranormal mystery deepens as the truth about the strange young girl in the summer of 1797 begins to reveal itself. Part 6. The Nurse in the Shadows. Before the workers died beneath the White House, a strange girl appeared among them. She was not supposed to be there. And when she vanished, death followed. The records from the 1790s are fragmented. Missing pages. Names scratched out. But one name appears in a single letter from 1797. One name that does not belong on any plantation ledger or hiring list. Her name was Sarah. No last name. No age. Just Sarah. A girl who seemed too young to be working on a government project. She was never listed as a cook. Not a laundress. Not a laborer. Yet she lived among the enslaved workers near the East Wing construction site. Some described her as quiet. Others said she spoke in a voice too calm for a child who lived in such horror. She cared for the sick during that deadly summer. She wiped sweat from their skin. She whispered to them as they trembled in the night. But no one could explain where she came from. One surviving note calls her a nurse of some experience. That makes no sense. She was a girl. How could she know anything about medicine? Unless her knowledge did not come from the living. Williamson wrote that she moved from worker to worker without fear of the illness. He said she looked healthier than anyone else in the camp. Her skin was smooth. Her eyes were bright. Too bright. Like silver reflecting moonlight. That detail appears again and again. The eyes. Cold silver eyes. Workers said she never blinked. One night in July 1797, a man named Isaac the carpenter had a fever so high that others thought he would not live until morning. Sarah sat beside him. Her voice was soft, calm. She told him that he must rest. That he must go with her soon. Isaac begged her to leave. He said her presence made the room colder. She smiled. It was not a kind smile. Williamson wrote that he found her outside the shed just after dawn. She was staring at the ground. He asked what she was doing. She said she was making space. When he looked closer, she was digging a shallow trench with her bare hands. Dirt under her nails. A strange humming coming from her lips. A lullaby with words from no language he recognized. By the end of that same day, Isaac was gone. Officially relocated. But Williamson saw no wagon. No departure. Only his blanket left behind. Still warm. Sarah disappeared that afternoon. None of the other workers saw her leave. She was simply gone. The sickness grew worse after that. And more workers started disappearing without a trace. Williamson believed Sarah had been sent by someone. Not a doctor. Not a plantation owner. Someone else entirely. Someone who needed the sick workers gone quickly and silently. Because as the project rushed forward, the commissioners could not risk delay. The dead were a problem. One that needed covering up. Sarah was the solution. But the girl does not only exist in dusty letters from the 1700s. She appears again much later. In sightings that no one wants to admit are real. In 1901, when bones were found beneath the East Wing, Henry Reed's diary mentioned a worker who refused to return the next day. He said he saw a girl near the open soil. A girl in an old dress. Standing perfectly still, watching them, her eyes bright like silver. Reed called him foolish. The worker quit. In the mid-1940s, during the Truman renovations, a military guard saw a child wandering the basement hall. He called out to her. She did not answer. When she turned toward him, her eyes gleamed like metal. She stepped into the shadows and was gone. The guard reported the incident. He was told children were not allowed in that area. The report was buried. He stopped working night shifts. And the most recent sighting happened in 2012. A maintenance worker was closing off an old utility tunnel. His light flickered. For a moment he believed he was not alone. There was a girl just ahead of him. He thought she might be lost. But she stood so still. Too still. When he took a single step toward her, his flashlight steadied and the tunnel was empty. He swears she glanced back before vanishing. Eyes like polished silver. Who was she? Some believe she was an enslaved child with knowledge of herbs and fevers. A girl forced to care for dying workers. Maybe she watched too many suffer. Maybe she snapped. Others believe she never belonged to this world at all. That she was a spirit trying to help those beyond help. A guide for the dying. A collector of souls buried beneath the foundation. But there is a darker theory. A whisper that keeps returning through the years. Some say that Sarah was not trying to cure the sick. She was making them sicker. They say the illness spread only after she arrived. They say she whispered to workers in their sleep and their health collapsed by morning. They say death traveled in her footsteps. A living weapon sent by those who wanted witnesses silenced. Because the commissioners needed the White House built. Quickly, quietly, without stories of corpses stalling the symbol of a young and powerful nation. Workers who questioned things would be a problem. Workers who grew too ill to continue were a different kind of problem. Problems get erased. Sarah erased them, but her own body was never found. No grave, no record, no master asking where she went. It is as if she existed only to complete a task. And when the task was done, she remained tied to the ground where her victims were buried. She belongs to the house now. The dark under the foundation. The halls that echo with footsteps that end too suddenly. If you ever tour the White House and feel a cold breeze against your cheek when no door is open, do not look back. If you hear soft humming behind a wall that has no opening, do not follow it. And if you see a young girl with silver eyes staring from the shadows, do not let her get close. Her work is not finished. She is still making space. Still digging. Still waiting. Would you like part 7 next? In the next chapter we uncover what happened during the massive White House renovations that accidentally awakened something far worse under the East Wing. Part 7. The blueprint that should never have been drawn. During the Truman renovation, workers found a room that did not exist on any blueprint. Inside it was a message scratched into stone. Not a name. A warning. After the discovery in 1901, the bones beneath the East Wing were reburied in silence. No reports. No press. No investigation. The secret stayed hidden beneath tons of stone. But the White House is never truly still. Years passed. Presidents moved in and out. America marched through war and change. And beneath it all the dead waited. By 1948 the house was in danger of collapse. Years of additions and fire damage had weakened the structure. President Harry Truman approved a plan to gut the entire interior while leaving the outside walls standing. Every beam, every brick, every floor, all torn out and replaced. Hundreds of workers were brought in. Electricians, steel men, carpenters. They drilled deep into the ground. They dug out the cellars. They opened walls that had not seen light in more than a century. That is when the trouble began. Workers complained of whispers in the basement. Cold spots that made their skin sting. Tools lost and later found standing upright in corners. A crane operator refused to enter the East Wing after he saw a young girl staring up at him from the foundation pit. He called out to her. She vanished. Security guards joked that the place was haunted. But the laughter died when a worker fell from a scaffold. He told doctors he had been pushed. No one believed him. He died the next morning from internal bleeding. His name was removed from the official report. Truman wanted no mention of ghosts. Then came the locked room. Blueprints showed empty space beneath the oldest foundation stones. But during excavation workers struck a wall. A sealed chamber. No door. No window. Just stone. When they cracked it open, a foul smell rushed out. Like wet earth and old rot. Inside they found a small square room. Bare dirt floor. Mold on the walls. But what truly frightened them was the message scratched into one wall. 4 words. Uneven. Carved in desperation. They must not rise. The letters were deep gouges. As if someone had used a chisel or a shard of stone. Beneath the warning were marks that might have been fingernail scratches. Long desperate lines trailing to the floor. The room was too small for a person to live in. Too bare for storage. It was a place for hiding. Or waiting. Or dying. The foreman ordered the chamber sealed again. But some workers talked. They wondered who made the marks. They whispered that maybe this was where a sick worker had been left to die long ago. Or maybe more than one had been trapped down here. Buried alive. The engineers pressed on. More strange finds followed. A ring crushed nearly flat. A broken chain. A jawbone that was not in a coffin. Always near the East Wing. Reports reached Truman. He told the press the house needed only routine work. But privately he wrote letters to his wife. In one letter from September 1949 he said he heard footsteps outside their bedroom at night. Slow, heavy, not a ghostly shuffle but the tread of a man still carrying weight from the world he left. In another letter Truman described hearing a young girl singing somewhere below the floor. He never found the source. Workers labored under the house every day. They grew anxious. Sleep came harder each week. Many asked to be reassigned. The foreman agreed too quickly. As if he also felt something wrong moving beneath the floors. Then the digging broke through a deeper layer of soil. A second grave site, smaller but just as horrifying as the one in 1901. Bones piled together. Skulls resting on ribs. The remains of people laid quickly without care. All facing the foundation stones of the East Wing. As if watching, a crew member fainted when he realized one skull still had iron shackles attached to its wrists. This time photos were taken. But the government ordered them locked away. Journalists were never allowed near the site. There was no talk of stopping the work. America needed its White House. The dead could wait. One night soon after the second grave discovery, a guard patrolling the basement heard scraping behind a temporary wall. He thought maybe an animal was trapped. When he pulled back the plywood, he found fresh claw marks carved deep into the ancient stone. The marks were new, the dust still loose on the floor. And there on the wall beside them were new words. 6 of them. We woke them by digging. The guard quit the next morning without collecting his final pay. Truman insisted the project finish as quickly as possible. The deeper they dug, the more the building seemed to resist. Cracks appeared overnight. A steel beam twisted as if bent by hands stronger than machines. A worker claimed he saw a man watching him from beneath the scaffold. But when he climbed down, no one was there. Only footprints in the dust leading toward the sealed room. Footprints without shoes. Workers began marking time. They counted days until they could leave that cursed foundation forever. But not everyone made it out. 2 men vanished. The official story said one fell into a service shaft and the other quit without notice. But other workers whispered a different truth. They said both were seen heading into the East Wing basement before dawn. They said a scream echoed up through the pipes. They said no one had courage to go look. When the renovation finished in 1952, the new interior gleamed with fresh paint and shining chandeliers. Truman smiled for the cameras. The nation was proud. But beneath the polished floors, the foundation stones were the same. The dirt where bodies lay was the same. The sealed room with the warning was the same. Nothing buried stays quiet forever. The White House was awake again. The dead were closer than ever. And they were beginning to remember what happened to them. Who left them there? Who erased their names? Who kept the truth underground? Their anger grew each year. It waited for the right moment. A time when history itself would shake the ground and open the walls once more. That time is shockingly close. Would you like part 8 now? Next chapter reveals what the White House staff discovered in the 1970s when footsteps echoed in newly renovated tunnels. Part 8. The sound beneath the earth. Jonathan Carter had always believed the human mind was capable of creating horrors far greater than anything that existed in the world. Yet as the night deepened over Blackwood Village, he found himself realizing that this was not imagination. This was not fear exaggerating shadows or old legends revived by frightened townsfolk. This was something ancient, something that had waited too long to be disturbed. The walls of the Rutledge estate were trembling. Not violently, not enough to break the stone or crack the wood. But it was constant, like something enormous was moving through soil far beneath, brushing against the underside of the world. Reverend Alden stood near the window, eyes narrowed. He had opened his Bible earlier, but his hands had begun to shake too fiercely to hold it open. Now the book lay on the floor, face down, as if refusing to witness what was coming. "Do you hear it?" he whispered. Jonathan swallowed. It sounded like a low groan. Like the slow grating of stone dragged across stone. It grew louder each minute. "The earth is waking," Alden said, voice unsteady. "Blackwood was built on cursed ground. I begged them never to disturb the crypt." The crypt. James Rutledge had mentioned it in his notes. A buried chamber below his mansion. A place older than Blackwood itself. A place no one was meant to enter. Lightning cracked outside. For just a moment the sky illuminated and Jonathan saw the silhouettes of townsfolk still standing in the field. The townsfolk who were not alive anymore. Their figures had multiplied. Dozens more stood motionless among the wheat. Their necks twisted and broken. Spines curved and bent at impossible angles. Some had been dead a century or more, judging by the tattered clothes rotting against their bones. Jonathan backed away from the window. "We need to leave before they get inside." "They are not coming inside," Alden said. "They are waiting." Waiting for what? For him. Jonathan felt his heartbeat slow. A coldness crawled along the inside of his bones. A heavy knock echoed through the hall. Not frantic. Slow. Patient. Someone is at the front door. Alden and Jonathan stared down the corridor where the old wooden door shuddered with each blow. A second knock. Then a pause. Then a third. "No one move," Alden ordered. "Do not look directly at him." Him. The door creaked open. The lanterns flickered, as if every flame in the house inhaled. Standing in the doorway was James Rutledge. His eyes were hollow, pupils replaced with red pinpoints of burning coal. His skin was stretched too tightly over his bones so that his jaw looked sharper. His fingernails were cracked and dark soil clung beneath them. Behind him floated a black mist. It rippled like living fog. It never touched the ground. James stepped inside without a sound. His head tilted slightly as he stared at the Reverend and at Jonathan. "You invited this, Reverend Alden," James whispered. "You stood in the chapel preaching salvation while I was down in the cellar bargaining with fate." The Reverend stepped back. His voice trembled. "I tried to save you. I tried to warn you. You tried to hide the truth." James raised a hand. The air thickened. The mist behind him curled like fingers. "You told me to pray. Pray for that which was already beneath us. Pray to the darkness that has always owned this land." Jonathan tried to run but his legs locked. The mist flowed forward like a tidal wave of night. It wrapped around Jonathan's ankles and pulled him to his knees. The cold almost burned. James moved closer. "You do not understand. It was sleeping. I woke it." The floor vibrated again. Louder. Almost unbearable. A deep rumbling like the heartbeat of the buried earth. Alden clutched the wooden cross around his neck. "You have doomed every soul in Blackwood." "Doomed?" James laughed softly. "No, Reverend. I have freed them." He snapped his fingers. The walls groaned. Portraits of Rutledge ancestors fell and shattered. A chorus of screams rose from beneath the floorboards. Not human screams. Not animal either. The sound was layered with centuries of agony. Jonathan's face pressed into the floor as the house shifted. He felt the wood bending. Splintering. The cellar door shot open with a violent crack. From the darkness below emerged the sound of something slithering. Not one creature. Many. Countless. "We must go," Alden cried. Jonathan forced his body to crawl away from the mist. It grabbed his arms but he tore himself free, ripping skin on the jagged floor. He stumbled toward the staircase. James watched them flee with a chilling calm. "You cannot escape what is already inside you." The stairs creaked as Jonathan and Alden rushed upward. The house was collapsing. The structure moaned as if the beams themselves were screaming. Outside the thunder roared and rain began to fall. But the dead in the field remained perfectly still, their broken bodies facing the house. The front door slammed shut behind them as they reached the top of the stairs, trapping James in the mist below for the moment. Alden gasped for breath. "We must reach the church. The crypt lies beneath its foundation. That creature below the earth was sealed centuries ago by the first settlers. That is where we must go." "What about James?" Jonathan asked, voice cracking. Alden stared with fear-drenched eyes. "James Rutledge is no longer the concern. It is what he serves." The rumbling intensified. A crack tore across the floor, spreading rapidly like a jagged lightning bolt. They ran toward the back of the house where a window opened to the orchard. Jonathan leapt through first and fell hard onto the wet ground. Alden followed just as a monstrous roar erupted from the home. Not the sound of a man. Not the sound of any animal. A sound that made the air vibrate as if the world itself were afraid. Jonathan turned back in horror. The Rutledge estate was sinking. The earth was swallowing it whole. Roof tiles flew off. The top floor collapsed. Windows imploded. Alden grabbed Jonathan's arm. "Do not watch. Keep moving." They sprinted through the orchard while the dead shapes in the field finally began to move. Their limbs creaked like old wood as they turned their heads in unnatural jerks. The church bell rang suddenly, a single strike echoing through the storm. Jonathan froze. Who rang the bell? The Reverend's face drained of color. Nobody alive. Behind them the last glimpse of the Rutledge house vanished into the earth. The world shook one final time, then fell silent. Blackwood's nightmare was now free. And the night had only begun. Would you like me to continue with Part 9 next? Part 9. The Church That Never Slept. Rain poured through the branches like sheets of broken glass as Jonathan and Reverend Alden hurried down the muddy road toward the old church. The bell had fallen silent again, but the echo of its toll lingered in the storm. The sound seemed to follow them. It seemed to be calling them. Behind them Blackwood Village was disappearing into darkness. The dead figures continued their slow advance. Their footsteps made no noise on the soaked earth. Their faces were pale and slack, mouths half open in a silent warning that no prayer could ease. The church appeared through the mist. Its tall stone tower loomed like a gravestone for the entire village. The wooden door stood ajar, swaying gently with the wind. "Someone opened it for us," Jonathan whispered. "Or something," Alden replied. They entered. Inside the church, dozens of candles flickered even though none of them had been lit earlier that day. Wax dripped to the floor in thick pools. Shadows danced along the stained glass windows as though the saints depicted there were twisting in their frames. Jonathan scanned the pews. Empty. Every last one. But he felt the church was far from empty. A voice echoed from the altar. "I knew you would come." Jonathan froze. There stood Clara Rutledge, pale and trembling, clutching a rusted lantern. Her hair hung loose, soaked from the rain. Her eyes were full of terror. The moment she saw Jonathan, she ran into his arms. Sobbing, "He killed them all," Clara cried. "My father brought something into this world and now it will not return to sleep. We must stop it. We have to." Reverend Alden stepped forward. "The crypt lies beneath the church. You know the entrance." Clara nodded hesitantly. "Yes. But once we go inside there is no guarantee we will ever come out." Jonathan looked into her eyes. "We have no choice." Clara led them toward the altar. She knelt beside a carved stone panel in the floor depicting a serpent curled around a skull. She pushed her palms against it. For a moment nothing happened. Then the stone shifted with a low grinding sound, moving aside to reveal a staircase descending into darkness. The breath of the earth rose from the opening like steam from a grave. It smelled of ancient rot and buried fear. Jonathan hesitated but Clara gripped his hand tightly. "We go together." Alden took one last look at the church. "May God forgive us for what we are about to face." Then he extinguished the nearest candle and stepped into the black. The stairwell was narrow and long. The flickering lantern Clara carried cast weak light along the stone walls. They spiraled downward until Jonathan could no longer see the church above. The sound of dripping water echoed deeper below. Clara spoke softly to fill the silence. "The first families who settled Blackwood found something buried beneath the land. They built the church over the entrance to contain it. My father found old manuscripts that described a ritual of awakening. He believed it would grant power beyond mortal understanding. He never realized that power already belonged to something else." Jonathan shivered. "What is it?" Clara shook her head. "They never named it. They only called it the voice beneath." At the end of the stairs they reached a large circular chamber. The walls were carved with symbols Jonathan could not read. A massive stone slab lay broken in the center of the floor, as if something enormous had forced its way out. Reverend Alden fell to his knees, despair tightening his chest. "The seal is broken. We are already too late." Jonathan scanned the chamber. Pools of fresh mud clung to the stones. Something had crawled up from deeper in the earth. Something huge. Clara moved to the edge of the chamber where a narrow tunnel descended further into blackness. "That is where the creature went." A loud slam echoed above them. The stairway entrance had closed, sealing them inside. Jonathan rushed back and pressed his hands against the stone. "We are trapped," Alden whispered in trembling breaths. "No, it is simply forcing us forward. It has a purpose for us." Clara looked at Jonathan with exhausted eyes. "My father is down there. Or what is left of him." They moved toward the tunnel. The deeper they went the louder the earth seemed to breathe. It pulsed with a low vibration that made Jonathan's teeth ache. The tunnel widened and sloped downward until they entered a cavern tall enough to hold the church above. Jonathan stopped breathing for a moment. Skeletons were fused into the walls. Not buried. Twisted as if the bone itself had melted into the rock. Thousands of them. Eyes hollow. Mouths locked open in eternal screaming. Clara covered her face. What did he unleash? A sound echoed behind them. Footsteps. Slow. Uneven. Jonathan raised the lantern. James Rutledge stood at the mouth of the tunnel. His skin was torn in places revealing earth packed into his veins. His jaw unhinged slightly too wide and his voice gurgled as he spoke. "You followed me. Good. It wants you to see." Alden stepped forward with the cross held high. "Whatever you are speaks no truth. The Lord denies you." James laughed. "Denial does not change reality, Reverend. The voice claims what was always promised. Blackwood belongs to what sleeps beneath." The cavern trembled. Dust fell from above. A low moan rolled through the chamber like mountains shifting. Jonathan felt the hair rise on his neck. James continued. It was buried by the first settlers because they feared it. They worshipped it with offerings of blood but sealed it away when the last priest lost control. They thought it would die in darkness. James pointed downward. It learned to grow in hunger. The floor cracked. A tendril of black soil rose like a living vine, pulsating with veins of glowing red. It twisted in the air like a snake. The cavern floor split further. More tendrils emerged. Jonathan retreated. Clara screamed. Alden fell back clutching his chest in terror. James spread his arms. Witness the return. Something enormous and shapeless pushed up from the chasm. A mass of shadows woven with flesh and stone. It moved with unnatural fluidity as if made of darkness itself. There were no eyes, no recognizable limbs, yet Jonathan felt it staring directly into his soul. A sound filled their minds. Not spoken aloud, a language older than humanity. Join. The tendrils surged toward them. Jonathan grabbed Clara and pulled her behind a pillar of fused skeletons. Alden shouted a prayer but the words burned in his throat. James knelt, smiling as though he awaited a blessing. The ancient horror continued to rise. Jonathan realized with sickening clarity. This was only its face. The rest of its body was still below. A single thought consumed his mind. They had reached the heart of Blackwood's curse. And there was no turning back. Would you like me to continue with Part 10 next? Part 10. The Forgotten Ones. What if the most powerful house in the nation stood on a graveyard? What if the foundation of democracy was built on bones? And what if the restless dead were finally ready to be heard? Jonathan held Clara tightly as the monstrous presence continued to rise from the abyss. The cavern shook as if the entire earth were groaning awake. The tendrils of dark soil twisted toward them, searching, hunting, desperate to claim new flesh. Reverend Alden struggled to rise, gripping his cross with trembling hands. He looked at Jonathan, his voice barely above a whisper. If this creature escapes the crypt, it will consume the entire world. Everything will fall. Clara stared through tears. My father brought this horror back. But only I can put it to rest. James Rutledge knelt in worship before the creature that had hollowed out his body and stolen his soul. His eyes glowed with unnatural fire. He smiled as the air grew colder and the smell of decay thickened around them. The voice beneath spoke again, but now Jonathan understood the meaning. It wanted life. It wanted worship. It wanted revenge against the living world that had buried it like garbage centuries ago. Clara stepped forward despite Jonathan's desperate grip. Let me go. This is my burden. My family caused this. No, he shouted. We face it together. The creature reared higher, its mass swelling with every breath. Bones cracked as they shifted beneath them. The skeletons fused in the walls groaned as if their trapped souls still felt pain. Jonathan felt powerless. There was no weapon against something born of both darkness and earth. Reverend Alden took a final deep breath, gathering the last of his strength. Look at the walls, Jonathan. Look closely. The settlers who sealed this creature left warnings everywhere. They also left a way to destroy it. Jonathan followed the flickering lantern light with his eyes. Symbols were etched around the cavern in jagged loops. They repeated again and again, forming a circle. An old ritual, one meant not to awaken but to imprison. If the circle is restored, Alden gasped, we can seal it once more. But the slab in the center was shattered. Pieces scattered. The circle broken. Clara knelt beside a fragment of the slab. Her face set with determination. Jonathan, please help me. Together they pushed the heavy pieces, dragging them into place. The cavern floor trembled harder. Mud tendrils lashed toward them. Jonathan swung a rusted iron bar at one vine, cutting it away. Black ooze splattered, but the creature only roared louder. James rose to his feet, screaming, stop. It promised life, eternal power. You cannot deny it now. We belong to it. Reverend Alden stepped between James and the others. You have lost your soul. You will not take theirs. James lunged. The two men crashed against a wall of skulls. Jonathan saw Alden fall, gasping, blood staining his collar. The Reverend looked up one last time, voice filled with painful conviction. Finish it. Jonathan grabbed the lantern while Clara slid the final slab piece into place. The symbols began to glow, pulsing with white light against the darkness. The circle was nearly complete. The creature realized too late what they had done. The entire cavern shrieked. A storm of tendrils whipped forward. One caught Jonathan throwing him back into a pile of ancient bones. Clara screamed his name. He could not breathe. The world spun around him. James tried to stop her, but Clara lifted the lantern high. Flames licked upward. Her voice rang out clear and strong. For the forgotten ones. She hurled the lantern onto the slab. It shattered. Fire erupted. The carved circle ignited in blinding gold light that filled the cavern like a burst of sun. The voice beneath howled. Its mass twisted and shrank, sucked downward by an unseen force. Tendrils turned to dust. Bones shook free from the walls, collapsing like a rain of history finally released. The earth swallowed the monster piece by piece, dragging it screaming into eternal darkness. Clara ran to Jonathan, pulling him into her arms as a blast of air knocked everything flat. For a moment the cavern became perfectly silent. The darkness was gone. The voice was buried again. Blackwood Village would live, but the cost was painful to see. Reverend Alden lay still on the broken stones. His eyes lifted toward the heavens. Peace softened his face. He had given his final prayer. James Rutledge's body was gone entirely. Only a pile of soil remained where he had stood. Jonathan and Clara climbed the crumbling stairway back to the church above just as the first rays of dawn touched the stained glass. Outside, the storm had vanished completely. The dead figures that had filled the streets were nowhere to be seen. The village breathed again. Clara leaned against Jonathan. "We survived." Jonathan looked back toward the crypt entrance. He knew the truth. The horror was not gone forever. It slept. And one day, when the memory of what had happened faded, someone might awaken it again. But for now the world was safe. For now the forgotten ones rested. Jonathan took Clara's hand. Her fingers were warm and alive. "Let us make sure they are not forgotten," he said. She nodded. Their story must be told. The bell in the tower gave one last soft chime. A farewell for the dead. A promise for the living. Blackwood had faced the darkness beneath it. And finally the truth had risen into the light. If you enjoyed this terrifying true history-inspired story of the forgotten ones, then make sure to subscribe, share and leave a comment below about your favorite part of this series. Your support helps bring hidden stories like this to life. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more horror-filled history.